when I was a student, I always really liked listening to professors who had some inside knowledge about practice, about what the real world, as we called it as students, looked like. Not that academia is not the real world, but we're studying business, which is an applied discipline because we want to find out something about the real world. So I always really liked professors with a profound knowledge. And so after I was done studying myself, I decided I'm definitely going to go into practice first. So I was a business consultant for 3 years and worked internationally, worked on very interesting projects and really enjoyed myself. But the one thing that I didn't enjoy so much was that I was often had the feeling that I was lacking depth in what I did in my daily work. And so I decided to get my PhD, which I really, really liked. And so in the end, I stayed in academia because I think I'm a better scientist than I was a consultant, but also because it fits my personality and my interest much better. Yeah, I think a simple way to describe what I'm doing is I do e-commerce and customer management. And of course, these are two very broad areas. Why do I do this? E-commerce kind of comes with my background. I studied computer science, information systems, and business. And so I've always had a strong interest in the online world. I actually, when I was a student, I made some money programming websites when it was still cool and not everybody could buy them, at every advertising agency around the corner. The customer management kind of came with the lots and lots and lots of available data that you have in e-commerce. So one of the special things about online or digital business is that you can track customers' every moves. And so, with all the data comes the possibility to analyze this kind of data. And with the possibility to analyze comes better understanding of what customers want, what customers are looking for, what works and what doesn't work. And so this e-commerce focus kind of evolved into a broader customer management focus. So things I'm looking at is how to acquire customers, whether it's a great idea to use promotions, whether that's a bad idea, in which cases it's good, in which cases it isn't, how to use referral programs, or once you have a customer, how to deal with things like product returns. So it's a very broad topic, and most of it is related somehow to electronic commerce. Yeah, people always say once a consultant, always a consultant, and I actually think it's true. It's kind of, I did it at a young age and it's ingrained in my DNA to some degree. There are differences, so differences in the daily work that we do, big differences. But what I kept from the consulting side and still do today is that I really care about solving business problems. So I'm an empirical researcher. I work with real world data. I cooperate with companies who provide this data. I cooperate with companies who are willing to try out different things. Academics would say it, who run experiments. Practitioners would call this A/B testing. Whatever you label this, I'm interested in finding out how stuff works, but only if it really matters in the real world. And so this is how academia and my former consulting life are similar to some degree. What is very different is the depth of the daily job. So in consulting, you often have a lot of time pressure to deliver results fast. There's this 80-20 rule, put 20% of the effort in and get 80% of the result. And as academics, we try to get to 100%. I mean, it's never possible to get like 100% certainty, but we're not happy with 80% and we're not happy with rule of thumbs. We really want to understand why things are happening. And so in academia, we're moving away from helping one specific company, trying to find generalizable knowledge that is true for many different companies. And I think that's the main distinction for my new job as a professor versus my old life as a consultant. I think one of the big difficulties in business is that the tools and the know-how that is available is often not up to date. Especially in business. This is actually very different in other disciplines like medicine, for example, where it's very, the track from academia, new research findings into practice is very fast because lives depend on it. And there's a steady exchange between people who are in the operation room, who are really, working with the patient, versus people who are doing the research in research institutions of various kinds. In business, somehow this tradition does not exist as much. There are many, many managers who are in their 40s or 50s who haven't seen the inside of a university since they left at age, 25 or so. And that's not a good thing, because knowledge evolves, because methods evolve. And if the managers don't come back to get state-of-the-art knowledge, chances are that their knowledge will become obsolete at some point. And that's what I see in business to some degree, which is a little different in other disciplines. It actually directly relates to what I just said, that companies often don't use state-of-the-art know-how in their day-to-day operations. And I think that's a big disadvantage for the companies who don't do this. In reality, you often see that some companies, especially young startups or relatively young companies, like an Amazon or a Zalando, for example, in the online world, they are growing so much faster and they are so much more successful than many of the old world players that have been around for much longer and should be so much better at many things, but in fact are not, because know-how is evolving and how business is being done is evolving. And I'm not talking about fundamental shifts here that all of a sudden none of the old truths are true, but we're talking about new technology that is available that new companies, young companies tend to embrace, young managers tend to embrace, because it's something they learned about at university. It's something that is relevant to their daily lives. Versus if you have older companies, older managers, very experienced, good managers in what they do in their daily lives, but things change, things develop, new possibilities come onto the market, and they are not able to keep up. Part of the reason why this is, why you see this effect that some companies are better at adopting state-of-the-art knowledge versus others is managers' pride. I actually just read a very interesting article from the CEO of Unilever, where he talked about how people are trying to fake digital marketing, and I couldn't agree more that many managers are out there afraid to admit that there's something they don't know about, which is not a smart idea, because reality will catch up and eventually people will find out when it's too late for you to be successful. So my strong recommendation is to find out how stuff works as quickly as things become available. Another thing is that sometimes, one thing where I actually don't agree with this interview is that I don't think it's enough to understand how consumers see things. So, for example, the article quotes a quote in the article is that people like in their 50s plus, they have teenage sons and daughters, and so they know how digital technology works because they have to use this to communicate with their kids, versus the 30 to 45-year-old demographic doesn't. And I think this is the same logic as saying, hey, I watch TV a lot, so I know how how advertising on television should work. And nobody would subscribe to this. And the same logic applies to the digital world. Just because you use it doesn't mean you know how it should be used for digital marketing. And I think that's something that still, takes some convincing before managers are actually willing to accept that it's okay not to know everything, but that there are sources of knowledge that you can tap into in order not to be left behind. I think sources of knowledge, in a general sense, can be many things. You can read books, you can read the news, you can talk to consultants of different sorts, but there are many disadvantages when it comes to state-of-the-art technology. Books, anything written, is inherently outdated because of the publishing process, and it takes quite a long time. Consultants, on the other hand, make a fortune on best practice sharing, so they take knowledge from one company and take it to the other. But if you really want to be at the forefront of things, you don't want to wait until best practice has become best practice and consultants tell you about it, because then you're late to the game. You want to be early to the game. And then I don't think there are any alternatives to going to the people who are actually producing this kind of state-of-the-art knowledge. And that's not the trainer, that's not the consultant, and that's not the book author. But that's professors who actually do this kind of research, who develop new methods, who produce new insights. And I think that's important to understand when you're thinking about where to get this know-how, where to get an education, where to do executive education of some sort, that it's really, there's no way around to going to the experts.